So what about from the candidate's perspective? How has the job market changed in the past like 20 to 30 years? From the candidate's perspective.
From the candidate's perspective?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's about I don't think it's about the job market, which changes all the time. And I mean, I can't speak, talk to an economist. Do you know what I'm saying? Like that's not, I mean, but I think that what's changed in terms of employment in general would vary based on, geography, position type, industry. Do you know what I'm saying? It's not all the same, but people with leading edge skills have a lot of power. I mean, so it is supply and demand. Do you know what I'm saying? And that was true when I got in the market in the 90s, and often candidates, the market was more inefficient so for instance, like you couldn't really easily get salary data. Do you know what I'm saying? And like, it was pretty hard, do you know what I'm saying, to get that information 30 years ago. It was hard to use the internet to figure out how many other people had your skills. It was hard. I mean, like we started one of the first job boards, there were no job boards. Like it was hard to figure out how many positions of a particular type were open because they were on print newspapers across the country. So like a lot of what's happened is the market has just gotten a lot more efficient. And so it's easier for candidates to zero in on opportunity. It's easier for candidates to understand their worth. And I think that has contributed to the average tenure, do you know what I'm saying, of employees in white collar has gone down.
Yeah, I think in the past few years, the job seekers seems to have more power over companies. And I think most recently we all heard about the big tech layoff, right? I mean, just a couple of days ago, Facebook just announced that they will lay off another 10,000 people. So yes. Do you think the market dynamic will change and the companies will hold a little bit more power going forward? Or how does these big tech layoff like change the market?
There's more people looking for a job. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's a market. Do you know what I'm saying? To say anything other than it's a market and that the market will go up and the market will go down, is really just not that much more to say. I mean, so yes, there are more candidates who meet certain qualifications that Facebook hired that Facebook didn't need to hire probably in the first place, based on projections of where they thought things were going, and based on how they thought the market was going to be competitive when they made those decisions, right? And those things didn't come true, and they made a correction, and that's what healthy businesses do. In my limited experience, some of those people may have very leading edge skills and may get a lot better jobs. Some of those people may find that their skills don't translate, to the market, and they might not get a better job. But again, it's a market. It's about you and your skills and what organizations need and what opportunities are available. A lot of people may want the same job that they had at Facebook, and that job might not be available to them at the same pay rate. And so, it's sort of like, I want the perfect house. Do you know what I'm saying? At this price in this neighborhood, and there's just no houses available. So, I think that it is one of those things where, if you need a job, you're going to need to find the job that fits you in that market, and holding out might not be the way to go.
So for those who are unfortunately affected, or the new grads, like who are looking for jobs, what are the kind of common tips or advice that you have for them to better secure their next stage in their career?
Well, mid-career or just starting out their career, because the answer is pretty different.
Let's start with new grads, like starting a new career. Like, how can they better prepare to find the first job out of school? Yeah.
Well, you're better off cheating. Just to be candid. I think that the first job is a weird question, right? So, are you talking about someone who somehow is 21 years old, is graduating with a 4-year degree, and has no work experience? That's a very specific scenario, but there are a lot of people who graduate from college with a 4-year degree who have a lot of experience. Do you know what I'm saying? Some of those people have been working since they're 15 years old or younger. So I mean, I think that the answer is it's a lot easier to get a job if you've had a job. And it's a lot easier to get a job when you're recommended by someone who's familiar with your work. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, so the crux of the employment market is you want someone who's at an organization that you want to work at, who is considered a top performing employee, to not only know you drank beer with them in college. No, they want to be familiar with what it's like to work with you and the quality of your work product. Okay, so in other words, it's not just I know them, it's I know them well, I've worked with them, and I vouch for them. Recommending for someone and vouching for them is very different. And I think what you're looking for in all situations in a job search where you need a job is to be able to generate a short list of people who can vouch for you, and to try to work through those people by asking their advice. You can't show up with your hand out. Do you know what I'm saying? You don't want to do that. You really want to go and say, hey, I'm in this situation. I'm looking for something new. We've worked together. Would you be willing to be a reference? And what would your reference be like? That's a good starting point. Oh my God, you're one of the best people I've ever worked with. That's the answer that you want. Any answer other than that, that's not them vouching for you.
So how do you kind of get people to vouch for you? Is it asking them for recommendations on LinkedIn profiles or put them in a cover letter? How do you actually get people to vouch for you when you're applying for a job? Yeah.
Well, the way that the process works for a referral at organizations who are good at recruiting is actually completely different for referrals. So normally you don't walk through the front door. If you do, you walk through the front door and you say, I was referred by this person. And what happens is they go talk to that person. Does that make sense? Before they talk to you, right? I mean, so you just say so. And often in some organizations, you're walked over. Like you send them their information and they take it to the recruiter or hiring manager. And then you have a conversation about you. And then that person facilitates an intro. Like, do you know what I'm saying? You almost circumvent the recruiting process entirely. Like people in mid-career, they'll be like, oh, so-and-so got hired. Do you know what I'm saying? But like, there wasn't an interview process. It's like, well, they worked with this person for the last 6 years. Like, and they were the hiring manager. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just, that's what you want. Like what you should do is try to instrument your career so that happens. Right. So is really what I'm getting at. And so, the challenge is how do you get there is, you need to pick the people, and then you need to do whatever's necessary where you're able to do enough work product where they can confidently say they did a great job, right? I mean, and so, sometimes that's interning work, sometimes that's volunteering, sometimes that's taking a job that you don't want to do and doing a great job so that so-and-so is saying you did a great job.
So since we're on the topic of resumes, like how can one decide what kind of for lack of a better term, keywords or skills to put on there, right? Because if I'm very proficient in SQL, then put it on resume, that's fine. But what if I'm just like middle of the road on Python, for example? Should I put it on there? Should I not put it on there? What are the importance of these terminologies and skills on your resume?
It really depends on how the recruiter is looking for people, right? So, I think that there's technology that does keyword analysis, which we include in our software. Some people in doing a first pass at a resume, right? So if there's a tremendous bias in the organization, and let's just be honest, this is about bias. Like the hiring manager is biased. People don't like that word, but it is. I am biased. I want a software engineer who knows this keyword. And often that's not true if you just want the crux of it. They just don't want to take the time and energy to explain that what they really want is a software engineer who's good at problem solving particular sorts of problems in particular ways, and they're good at object-oriented programming, and they have familiarity with certain types of libraries and coding styles. And it would be wonderful if they'd worked in Python because actually they'd climb the curve faster than the next guy, and that's part of the decision-making criteria. Like, so a lot of it is, it's more complex than buzzword bingo. So in other words, people are like, oh, it's all about buzzword bingo. And it's like, well, buzzword bingo is really just filtering. So at the end of the day, in the event that you're applying, either some automated technology or a human being might have been trained, there's a hierarchy of needs and they're ranked this way. And sometimes what you're trying to do is just kind of get past that filter to talk to the person. And sometimes keyword stuffing will accomplish that. So the other thing about keyword stuffing is, it's also about search engines, right? So there are massive LinkedIn, Indeed, there are massive repositories of employment data, and recruiters go to these systems, to identify candidates and do outreach. And if you do some keyword stuffing, that may help. But there's also, that's all it will really do. And probably what's more important is, the way that I think about resumes is you don't want to write something also that how do I put it? That puts people off. Like you don't want to write for the algorithms. Like what you're really writing for is either the hiring manager or the human who's going to need to make an assessment on whether to call you. And what you're really doing is giving them the bullet points of the stories that you want to tell. So you'll be forced to tell some stories in an interview, right? Like they have questions that they're going to have to ask. And you just do your best. But then the resume and the bullet points underneath each job are really about the stories that you want to tell. And what you're doing is you're prompting them to ask you those stories. That's about what you were talking about, the OKRs. So like a resume. So if you want them to ask you about your knowledge of Python libraries, talk about that. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, but it would be better to say, was tasked with identifying, which framework we were going to use, evaluated this, and this, and chose this, right? Like that's kind of a better bullet point than just stuffing something in there. So the general advice is if there's something that you want to come up with, someone's looking for something, find a way to get it in there, but don't do it in an obvious keyword stuffing way. It'd be better to explain how and why that's in there. Do you know what I'm saying? In the context of a project or a story. And you have to be selective. You can't just put everything in there. Just throwing everything in there is not a path to victory, right? I mean, like recruiters are not, experienced recruiters are not that dumb. I mean, you've looked at thousands or tens of thousands of resumes. They know when they're looking at a good one,
So what does recruiters exactly look for? Like, for example, like when you're trying to hire someone or fill a particular role, like what kind of qualities do you look for, whether it's on resume and also in the interview?
Well, recruiters are curators of company culture, if you want the crux of it. Like, so, one of the things I talked about how I'd go to startups and I'd sort of have to try to help them get better at recruiting, right? Was part of what I did before I started JobScore. And a lot of it was just having people think about recruiting. So here, if you think about it for a minute, let's say a company has one recruiter, okay? And the company hires 150 people over a 2-year period and only have the one recruiter. Who's the only person that those 150 people talk to that you're absolutely sure that they spoke with them?
The recruiter, basically.
Correct. And who influences who gets to the next stage of the process for all of those 150 hires?
So the recruiters, yeah.
Who helps manage the decisions of which one you're going to pick? Who pushes? Who negotiates? And so, the recruiter's belief system is important. So in other words, it's not easy to get a recruiter to completely change their belief system to represent your company. Does that make sense? So sometimes hires are a reflection of that person. Like you can't stop being you. Does that make sense? Everyone has a certain amount of you in you. And then the other thing is they're a reflection of what their hiring managers say they want. So at the end of the day, recruiters don't make hiring decisions. I mean, it's extremely unusual to have an organization where the recruiter has the final say. I like to say that they have accountability, influence, and no authority. So in other words, recruiters are these middle people, right? And I think that a lot of what they need to do is understand the values of what's important in the role, understand the values of what's important on the team, understand the values of what's important in the boss-employee relationship, and understand the values of the organization, and do their best to understand the candidate and how well they match each thing. Does that make sense? So I think maybe a good thing for candidates to understand is it is very unusual for a good recruiter to ask a question without having an underlying motivation or thing that they're looking